Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're Masechtas Avodah Zarah daf Ayin Aleph. We're going to begin on Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, third line from the top. Says the Masnisan, Ha'umanim Shel Yisrael. So let's say you have workers, and they are Jewish. Sheshalach lahem oivik chavim chavia shel yain nesach b'scharon. So you had a bunch of Jewish workers, and for payment, the Akum decided to give him yain nesach, but of course the problem is you can't really accept it because it's aser b'hana, so not much of a great reward or salary. So mutar loimel, you could say to the Akum, tein lanu es dameha, give me its value instead. As Rashi says, the halo kanu law. He didn't actually pick it up. They weren't kainet, didn't pick it up or anything. However, mishenichnas rishus and aser. Once it goes into the rishus already, then that's too bad because we've already been kainet, and then that's it. It's aser b'hana. Wouldn't want to work for him anymore. Says the Gemara. So Rabbi Yehuda Marab, mutal adam loimer levik chavim. A person can say to an akum, say v'hifas olai meches manas hamelach, and go and basically help pay for these taxes that are owed to the king. Says Rashi, which is Arnona, which is brought down at length in Masechtas Pesachim. Shahaya Noisnin Mitabiyaisenu Mimatenu. So they have to pay a certain tax for their grains or their animals. Isur, a tenth. So this Yisrael had to give wine. You could say hefesolai, that basically appease the king by giving taxes for me. Now certainly he's going to end up giving yain nesach because the Akum is going to do this favor. And then he's going to end up paying him back for having helped him pay the taxes. Now, kivan dehavi matzi lasaluki lashlicha damalka bezuzi. The reality is that since they could have instead given money, it's not really his shliach. We didn't say I want you to pay my taxes with yain nesach. You said just pay my taxes and I'll reimburse you. So even though they did use yain nesach, then it's still going to be mutter, and you didn't do anything wrong because they could have just paid with money. And then you would have paid him back the money that he gave them. So that's the reason why you can say this. Meisvei, so that the Gemara asks a question. Al yomer adam a person should not say to an akum, oil tachtil oitzer, that you should take basically my place for the ruler. So it almost sounds like the exact same thing. And here it says you can't do it. So Amalei Rav, oil tachtil oitzer ka'amrit. You're asking me a kasha when he says such a direct line. He says this halodamia. That's not comparable. It says Rashi kivan yarmulei oil tachti sabi ki'ilu yahavi Yisrael dahabim kaimahu. It's your mamish making him into a shliach with these words. So certainly that's why it's a problem. Halodamia elulha avol maltani min ha'itzer. If you say save me from the oitzer, says Rashi, the ashel suki bezuzi. In that situation, you're saying you can save me in any way, even with money. And therefore, that's the reason why it would be mutter. And therefore, in fact, it's not a kasha because the seifa supports what we just said. Says the Masnisan. Says the next Mishnah. Hamoicher yeinu levin kachavim. A person who sells wine to an akum. So pasuk ad shloi madad dama mutarin. If let's say they set a certain price, certain price of money, but it was not measured, so dama mutarin, so then the money is mutter. The Gemara is going to explain the reason. Rashi says that it's possible that an akum is kaina even by pulling an item. Hilka kishemoided, when you measure, that's hainu mashicha. That's comparable to measuring of the amount of wine that's being given over is the same thing as like mashicha. V'kanya v'kachavim yad. and therefore the Akum acquires it immediately. Tahavili Yisrael Zuzi Gabe Deavkachavim Behaluya Behalva Beyain Nesach Loihavi Adin Nagabe. So it's not considered Yain Nesach until he actually touches it. So once it was measured, Mashiach was done, and therefore he's kain it. But you can still take the money because it didn't become Yain Nesach until he actually touched it, and therefore it's allowed. Mada Dachlo Pasek Dam of Asura. However, let's say you first measured it, which means the Akam did Mashiach, and you didn't designate any prices, so at that point it will be Asur. Okay. And Rashi says over here, why is it Mada Dachlo Pasek Dam of Asura? The Kivan Deloy Pasek Dam of, since you didn't even set a price for this, Lo Samchadaiti, the Akam is not kain it yet. Because until you actually agree on a price, it doesn't mean anything. Okay, we're going to get to that in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, and we're going to go back and forth until we finally prove that this is absolutely the case, that an Oiv Kachavim can be kain Mashiach by pulling things. Teda, the Hani Parsoi, we know when it comes to the Persians, Mishadri Pardashani, Lahadadi, they're always sending, Rashi says, daira and gifts to each other, Lahadribahu, and they don't retract. It must be because once they do Mashiach, that's it. And therefore, again, that's a raya that Mashiach is kaina. Says Rashi, Loshan Achar, Mechuvas HaGa'ainim, that what exactly are these Pardashani? Mishesh lo korchitin limchor. If a person has a certain measure of wheat to sell, so you designate the you can set the aside of money and give it to the buyer, and he can go to his house. So Mishager lo kav chitin, and all he does is he sets a sample, a small amount of wheat, liros kamahin yafin, to see how good how high quality the wheat is. And if the buyer keeps that small amount, miskaim hamekach, then we say the whole deal is good. So it's almost like a sampling at an ice cream store, right? You take a little sample, but that sample, if you in fact accept it, therefore the kinyan is chal. V'im enu chafetz behu machziro. Let's say you didn't want this sample, demonstrates that you're not happy with the quality of the wheat, then it can be returned. But what do we see? That again, it must be that the fact that they don't retract on these deals or these gifts, so that's a proof that it's Mashiach is kaina. So what do you mean? If it's not kaina, and the only way that an akim can be kaina something is through matan mais, by giving money, so why don't the persons back out? The only reason why is there a mais ruchahu did not kita lahu. Because it's, as Rashi says, gasois, it's basically a sign of haughtiness, that which is being done. Basically what that means is that it's not good business practice that they should be backing down. They have to agree to whatever it is. Even though maybe Meikar and Din they could back down, but it doesn't look good. Okay. So, but it's not necessarily a raya that's the din. So how do I know this? That he said a statement to, as Rashi says, to those who sell wine. He said the following: Ki kal yisu chamra, when you're measuring out wine to an akum, shaku zuzi minaihu. First take the money, so this way you already have the money, it's yours. And then v'hadir kailin lahu, and then only afterwards measure it out. The ilo, if you don't do that, nikitu b'hadaihu zuzi, if you don't in fact do that, then uzefyunhu v'hadir shakil minaihu, then give them the money and then take it from them. So it's like a loan. You don't do this. Then it becomes your yain nesach in your rishus. When you take the value of it, you're taking the value of yain nesach, which you're not allowed to do. So based on what we just said, If in fact, as soon as an akum does mashiach or measures it, the akum is koinit, so then midamashcha v'kachavim kanya. So once he's koinit, yain nesach u'habi yad denagabe. I thought we said it's not considered to be yain nesach until he actually touches it. So the Gemara says like this: if we're dealing with a kosher vessel, and therefore it's poured into it, you're right. Therefore, it wouldn't be a problem because it's not yain nesach until he touches it. Rather, we're talking about a kli that is an akum's kli. So saif kimat lavir demana kanya. So what? Once he touches. So anyway, the point is that therefore it becomes yain nesach immediately. The second that it goes into the kli, even before he touches it. So saif kimat lavir demana kanya. Once it enters into the airspace of the kli, kainet yain nesach havi ad demati ler yaisa man until it hits the bottom. Shema. So maybe we can learn from here nitzach chibor. As you said, when something flows, does the bottom attach to the top to aser that which is in the top? And that we saw previously is not so poshut, it's a machlokas. Lo. So in this situation, if the Avi Kachavim has the clean his hands, then he's koinit b'hagba. The kli is on the ground. So v'tikni le kelav. So let him be koinit the kli. Shemamina kelav shalekech which is meicher ulekan lekech. We've had this in other places as well. That if you have the kli of the buyer and it's in the rishos and the meicher, that the lekech cannot be koinit, because that's why he has to do hagbah or something. Until then, the fact that it just pours into his kli is not enough because it's still in the rishus of the meicher. Well, maybe actually it's kind of. So then what's this whole deal if it's on the ground or he picks it up? He's kind it with the kli immediately. Nasa. So we're saying that there's actually droplets of yayin on the tip of his kli. The kama in nasachle, and therefore every single time the wine touches, even the very top of it, then it becomes yain nesach, and therefore that is the issue in this case. Okay, but you're right. If it was a kli which was clean, so then it wouldn't be an issue until it hits the bottom of the akum's cup. But over here we're talking about a situation where it was already becomes yain nesach immediately. Rabbi Shemuel said, as Rashi points out, that yain nesach shenafel labor. If let's say I have yain nesach that fell into a pit of kosher, or let's say of kosher barrels, kul aser. Rabbi Shemuel you could sell the whole thing to an akam, just not the value of the yain nesach that you can't benefit from. Rabbi Shemuel is quite lenient with regard to this. Alma mishum teruvas yain nesach, because of this forbidden mixture. According to him, we're not going to aser all the Jews' wine. Yanan kimlon kol makom sheshanim Rabbi Shimon Gamliel ben Mishnasinu hachamaisin. We typically hold like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So how do we understand this? Apparently, we're going against the sheet of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel actually would hold this is not a problem. So midi hu taima el Rav diamer Rav halach Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So the whole question is only in accordance to Rav, that he says that the halach is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Chavius b'chavius, with regard to a barrel to another barrel, of a low yayin b'yayin, but not if it's wine to wine. Says Rashi, dechin yisar yayin nesach b'yayin kosher kul aser. So maybe the only time he says this is when it comes to mix this barrel and that barrel, Jews' wine, Akum's wine, in a barrel. But if it's wine mamish poured into each other, there we're more strict. Okay, meisvei halokech garutais min avikachavim, and we've had this before. A person who purchases pieces of metal, or let's call it silver, from an Akum, there's an idol. Some image that's found in all this metal. So imad shlonasan mois mashach yachzer. If before the money was given, mashiach was done, you could always return it. Or imashanasan mois mashach. If let's say money is already given, then yochiyam amel. why do we say you can give it back? Understand, if Mashiach was already done, that's it. Then he's kainit. So Rabbi mishum de mirsi ki mekach tais. The truth is, says Rashi, havi Mashiach betois. Because this person actually did not intend to give you idols, and the whole thing appears like it was a mekatos, which means that you're giving it back to him because it was not a good deal. Rav Reisha mekatos, save a lot mekatos. Ella Omar Rava Reisha was saying mekatos. Reisha the law Yav Zuzi. The Reisha didn't give any money, so So it doesn't look like there was idols. It doesn't look like there was an idol in the hands of the Yid. Same for the Yoav Zuzi, since monies were exchanged, and therefore for that reason, even though both of them are mekatos, but the problem is that it looks like the idol is in the hand of the Yid, and therefore because of that, it's a problem. It says Rashi, mekatos having Mashiach b'tais. Okay. Alright. Seifa the Yoav Zuzi mischazik kavod chachamim b'yad Yisrael. So Omer Rav Mar Kashish v'Reidu Rav Chistel Rav Ashi Tashma. Hamarchi yayin avodas chachamim, which is our Mishnah. So you sold wine to an akum, pasak ad shalom madan. Let's say you designated how much it's going to cost, but you didn't measure it yet, which means you didn't do mashicha yet. So damu matarim, then the monies are mutter. Navi amrit mashicha b'chachamim kaina. If it's not kaina, amai damu matarin. So why do we say that the monies are mutter? So hakamai skina the akdim le dinner. We're talking about a situation where the monies were already pre-given before all of this. Yihachi ema seifim madadad shlo pasak dam of asurin v'ida kadam le dinner or my dam of asurin. That the money was given before, so why is it usur in that case either? So Amalei well didach diyam Mashiach b'chachavim kaina. According to you, that says Mashiach does work. Amai reisha dam matarin v'seifa dam asurin. You ask the same kasha. Ella ma'isla chamemar. Pasak, if you designated the amount of money that was going to be given, then samcha daite. Then the akum has in his mind intention that this will be a sale. Lo pasak o samcha daite. However, if you didn't do this, he's not samich das on the sale. L'didinami afagav the kadam le dinner. According to me, even though he gave the money before, pasak samach daite, lo pasak lo samcha daite. Even when monies were exchanged, but there wasn't an exact agreement as to how much the deal was going to be, so then in that situation, the din is that he's not samach das there either. Okay, before we get to the punchline, let's see a couple more questions. Let's start off by looking at question 5, which we just had. So he said, if the monies were already designated, you said this is how much the deal is going to be, even though you didn't measure it yet, which means Mashiach wasn't done, so you can keep the money at that point. So Madua Dama Mutarin Mashiach Enu Kaina Ba'akum. If you hold Mashiach as not Kaina, so then how do we understand this whole case? So like why in the Seifa where you measured but you didn't designate, why is the money usher in that case? Okay, so this is what we said. Mayri behikdim lo dinner, that the monies were already given before. The kana ha'akam b'moisa. The truth is the akam was already kaina the wine right off the bat after the monies were given. So now the wine belongs to the akam, and the yid keeps the money because it was already given before. And obviously the wine never became yain nesach because it was already, the money was given before. It became yain nesach only later. So the seifa, why do we say in the seifa that the monies are aser? Kivandu pasak, since they didn't designate samcha daite of a yain d'Yisrael v'neser. It's considered like it's Jews' wine, and therefore it's then becomes like contaminated and becomes yain nesach in the hand of the akum. And then after it became yain nesach, you want to get money. You want the sale to take place. No. So even though the money was given before, that's not enough, because it's necessary that it was a designation of how much the money was going to be. And until that takes place, the fact that monies were given to the Yisrael before doesn't help. That wine still belongs halachically to the Jew, and therefore after it's given over to the Akum, it becomes Yain Nesach, the Jew's wine is Yain Nesach, and therefore after the Kinyan actually is Chal, once he's Samich Das, after it's measured and everything, so then it's already Yain Nesach, and therefore that money that you received, that's the Kinyan wasn't the time you got the money, it was later on. Okay, and therefore that's the problem. Let's look at question TA 23. Madua. So he said the same thing. Kolzman shlo pasak. This is pretty straightforward. As long as you didn't designate the price, lo samcha daiti v'havli demei yain nesach. And therefore, again, because it belongs to it's the Jewish person's wine. Okay, so that's the problem with that. TB 25. Yisrael hamoicher yain la'akum v'shayvach yain l'keiv shel akum the manchei ara. Right, so he sold this wine, and this wine he poured it into the kli of the akum. Madua aser lital damim avor hayayin. Why aren't you allowed to have this wine? What's the whole problem? So this is TB 25. So he said it could be a few reasons. You could either say maybe I'm sure this is not what they were looking for, nitzak chibur, right? Maybe that would be a problem. Or we're talking about a situation of again, I'm not sure if that's what they're looking for, but they're definitely looking for Kagoin deika akeves yain apumi de kuznyasa, right? That there is this already droplets of the akum on the top of the wine on the top of the kli, the kama and nasechle, and therefore it just becomes yain nesach immediately. Let's see what I wrote. This is like a lot of different answers. Okay. It could also be a raya whether or not Mashiach is kaina. Okay, but let's see what I wrote over here. Very difficult question. HaYisrael kaines hayayin nesach koidim lekinyan shel akum. I'm not sure if that's the right way of writing it. Im pasakul damim shu samech das liknai so isa shum kinyan kamo Mashiach azmoter. This is pretty wrong. This is like drawing for straws. So again, it could be totally on the if Mashiach is kaina benachri ba'akum, but really we're talking about there's yayin on the top of the kli. Okay, so. And therefore, it becomes yain nesach immediately. Okay. TC 26. So here we go. So another different question. I got this one right. Etc. Madua lo yachzer harizem mekachtais. So why not? So I said kivandi oiv zuze. Since you gave money, mischazi kavodah zarah b'yad Yisrael. It looks like there was avodah zarah in the hands of Yisrael. Umixi kaman demazvin leilakum, and then it looks like afterwards that you're turning around and selling it back to the akum, which is the problem. That's TC 26. Okay, so again, that's the din, and even though again it's a mekach tais, nonetheless we say, let's see, let's find it. Seifa is the yoyiv zuzi mischazi kubis chavim biyad Yisrael. So that's the answer. That's what we're looking for right there. Okay. All right. Now let's finish this up. So what's the din when it comes to Mashiach for an akum? Is he kaina? So we're finally going to come to an answer, and what a beautiful answer it is. Here's the Gemara. Amli Ravinu Rav Ashi Tashma Diyam Rav Chiba Rabam Rav Yochanan Ben Noach Neharai Gal Pachas M'Shavar Pruta. That if a Ben Noach, says Rashi, would steal from a Yid, even something less than the Shavar Pruta, then even though, as Rashi says, Afagav the Gabi Yisrael Olav B'Maynahu, it doesn't have the din of money, and therefore normally the Machileha he'd be Moichel because it's nothing. Gabi Yochavim B'Maynahu, it's considered to be money. And we know that a Ben Noach is a mitzvah al Gezel, as is brought down in Masechta Sanhedrin, and V'azhara Sholahen Zuhi Misasan V'ein Srichen Hasra. Okay, I'm not sure why Rashi is to tell us that, but regardless, the point is that if they steal even Pachas M'Shavar Prut, they're killed. Now V'lo Nitain L'Hishavoin, and not only that, you don't need to return it to the Jew. And the reason why is because. And Rashi on the next daf says, "V'lo mechayiv lahadora Yisrael dehamochela." You can either say it's like kuma b'rabi mino maybe, but the other is it's not money. So the whole din of returning the heshivas shegazal is dafka, something which has value, like something which is worth at least a shavar pruta. Pachas M'Shavar Pruta is not. So anyway, that's the din. So my nerag. So. They obviously didn't pay for it because then they didn't steal it. That's maybe a different thing through coercion, but it's not stealing. So how is it possible that he could steal something? It's just a simple example. So it must be because of Mashiach. Questions like, how about Hagbah, or what if it's food and they eat it? Anyway, so the Gemara uses this as a raya. So the answer is no. Maybe the reason why is really they're not koinit, but mishum that Zarah Yisrael, since they caused pain and anguish to the Yid by stealing something of his, that's the punishment. So as we continue, Ayin Beis Manal, Mamai Lo Nitan Lehishabain. What does that mean? It means the Eno B'Taris Hishabain. It's not shaykh to return because it's not worth a pruta. That's all it's coming to tell you. It's not B'Taris Shum Gezel. It's not considered to be stealing, and therefore. That's the reality. And Rashi says over here, "B'hu adin l'shavar pruta, v'adin l'pazma shava, v'ashmin in the heragalel." Okay, so the truth is they don't have to return it anyway. Okay, ihachi a maseifa. This is where it gets more difficult. It says b'chaver v'natli mimenu neragaleha. So the akum stole from the yid, pachas M'Shavar Pruta, he's going to be chay misa. But what happens if someone stole it from that akum? Akum number 2 is also going to be nerag. Now Bishlam Areshna. Mishum that Zarah Yisrael, the Yid lost something. It's already been lost. It's not getting it back. So the first person is punished because of Zarah Yisrael. El Seifa Mayavin, what did he do? El Shmamina, Mashiach Babakhavim Kaina Shmamina. It must be the fact that the second Akum who stole from the first Akum, the fact that he's Nerag, it must be a raya because he actually was kainit. How was he kainit? He must have been kainit with Mashiach. So therefore that's the raya as we conclude and look at question 6. Maha raya shehevi gemara the Mashiach kainit ba'akum. So medisanya akum shegozo pachas M'Shavar Pruta ba'achar v'gozo mimenu ha'achar nerag v'ilu kanya kama b'Mashiach amay nerag acharin. So the first guy, the kashing is interesting. If the first person wasn't koinit, then how could the second person be chayiv? He didn't steal it from the akum. Okay, all right. That's one way of framing it. And I think this question is repeated somewhere as well. This is also TC 27. Let's see if it's framed differently. Akum sheganam yisrael pachas M'Shavar Pruta uba'chavero v'ganav mehaganav harishon. Mi mehem nerag umadua, right? And it says lamaskana. So to me, what I wrote was, and this is really the same as question 6, this is TC 27, is that it's a raya because an akum is kind of Mashiach. But I think what I wrote is maybe the first one is high because of Zarah Yisrael. But again, maybe the fatal maskana that we see that the second was chai because he was kind of Mashiach, so then he'd also be chai because he was kind of Mashiach, and that's probably what they were looking for. Ad kan.